Hello, everyone. It's Gaurav Kapoor from Newristics. Welcome to Behavior 12. This is August 7th, and we'll get right into it. I know some people are, but we will get started on time. Behavior Masterclass is a series of masterclasses that it's 30-minute class where we help pharmaceutical marketers and market researchers learn science and how to apply it in the pharmaceutical industry. The focus is on using behavioral science to understand customer insights as well as marketing or messaging applications of behavioral science in pharma. And if there's anybody new to behavioral science itself, you may want to just Google and do a little bit of searching. But just as a very quick introduction, behavioral science is a field of research which has now won 3 Nobel Prizes, and it's brought attention to the fact that human beings make a lot of decisions in life using mental shortcuts like heuristics or even biases to make most of the decisions they need to life quickly and efficiently. Research, what has been shown is that many of these mental shortcuts which use heuristics can even lead to sometimes bad or outright irrational decisions. This science is very helpful in understanding your customers. Actually, it's helpful even to understand yourself as a human being and how you make decisions. But in a professional setting, you can use it to understand how physicians, patients, or payers are making decisions using mental shortcuts as well, and how to potentially incorporate that into your marketing planning, as especially communications and messaging. In each class, we take 2 specific mental shortcuts or heuristics and educate people on what they are, help them understand using pharma and non-pharma everyday examples, how that heuristic is used to make decisions, even lead to potentially suboptimal decisions. We also look at how, using examples again, how that heuristic is being utilized by some brands or organizations, and how you can also utilize it in the future, what your strategy should be in the disease state where you are focused on, and on your brand, how could you possibly, if that heuristic is important to you and is driving your customers' decisions, how would you actually act upon it? So we'll learn about that as well. So the first heuristic of this masterclass is a bias, and it's called actor-observer bias. So let's first learn what it is, and then we'll look at examples of how it influences decision-making. It's a bias that all of us are very familiar with, and almost all of us have been, we've used this bias one way or the other to make decisions. When we are an actor versus an observer, we behave very differently. When we are an observer, we look at somebody who's having a problem or who's having problems. We tend to blame them for their problems. We don't take into account other circumstances that might have led to the problems they're having. We hold them responsible, much more responsible than we hold ourselves. So if we were having the exact, we suddenly don't blame ourselves. We tend to find all sorts of other things in life to blame. We find excuses one way or the other because we don't want to admit to the fact that, look, I was wrong, or I should have done this differently, etc. Actor-observer bias. We're biased to want to think about ourselves differently as versus how we think about others. Now let's look at some examples of how this bias can affect decision-making in everyday life, and then in medicine, and then we'll get even more specific. All of us know people who are late to meetings, late to calls, late to anything. And some of them are just like they're just chronically late. It doesn't matter what the event is, they'll be late to it. Others are erratic. Sometimes they're late, sometimes they're on time. But if you are late to a meeting, there is almost always going to be an excuse coming out of your mouth. You will never say, I'm sorry, I'm late to this meeting because I left late. I left my last meeting late. And that's just what it is. You will not admit to the truth, which is in most cases that you didn't plan your time well. When someone else is late to a meeting, they are just inconsiderate of other people's times. We should just get started. They are often late. You are much more likely to jump to a conclusion or a judgment like that for somebody else than for yourself. Let's look at actor-observer bias in our society, and let's apply it to a quite serious problem, which in some cities has become, it's kind of reaching a tipping point, and not an epidemic, but it is affecting cities like San Francisco, like LA, like Seattle, very significantly. And it's homelessness. In the US, on any given night, it's anticipated that over 600,000 people are homeless. Now, that doesn't sound like a very big number, but compared to a percentage of the population, compared to the fact that US is supposed to be the wealthiest and the most advanced country in the world, if you put all of those things take those into account as well, it is a reasonably high number. If you look at people who've ever been homeless, people go in and out of homelessness, that number now suddenly more than doubles. There's 1.3 million people now who have been homeless at some point. And if you look at philanthropy, a lot of people would participate in philanthropy one way or the other. They give money to some cause in life. People people on this masterclass know, at least. You would yourself, or people who do that. And if you were to ask people who do give money, how do you choose the causes that you support? One of the things that they will often say is, I want my money to reach the needy, and I want less of my money to go to the middleman, whether it's Red Cross or World Vision or whoever like that. I want more of my money to reach the needy. That's pretty ironic, isn't it? Because if you really wanted your money to reach the needy, you could literally hand $1 to the next homeless person you see, or 5 or 10 or 500 or 1,000. And actually, there's research now that has shown, based on long-term 10+ year experiments done in several countries in Africa, that the single most effective way to get people out of poverty is to actually just hand them cash. Instead of helping them with services, etc., if you give them cash, they actually use the cash much more responsibly than you would ever imagine. They not only save it, they invest it into creating businesses, etc. So why don't we give money to homeless people? And this is something we've actually researched. You ask people, they give you all sorts of excuses. They look scary. They smell bad. I don't want to talk to them or just be near them. They're going to waste the money. He'll just drink, they'll spend it on beer and cigarettes, etc. How do I even know if they are homeless? They look like they just got a car to stand by the side of the road, and they don't sometimes they don't even look homeless. So they're cheating. All sorts of these, and some of them might be doing that. But of the 600,000+ people every night, or the 1.3 million people ever, most of them are not cheating. They are in that situation. So what gives? Why don't we? And actor-observer bias can help explain our own behaviors here. We have this, many times, many of us might have this deep down belief that if they were really willing to, if they were really motivated, they were willing to work hard, I'm sure they could find something to do, some job, something. So the fact that they're not doing it, they are to blame for their own situation. Now, unlike many countries where literally children are born into homelessness, in this country, most people are not. So at some point they became homeless. They had a home, or they had something that looked like a home, and they became homeless. What were those circumstances? Well, we don't care. I don't have time to think about all of that. And we definitely cannot relate to the idea that we ourselves could ever be in their situation or in their shoes. All of us would have this feeling that I have worked hard in my life to ensure that I am nowhere close ever to be found. I would never, ever end up in a situation like that, right? And I worked hard for it. Could this type of situation be changed? Here's an example. Most of the time you see somebody standing by the side of the road and they have a sign that says homeless and hungry, please help, God bless, whatever, something like that. Could you turn a mirror to the society and help them understand in a subtle way that maybe you're not appreciating all the facts? Maybe you're not able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and maybe things might seem different if you were to look at the world through their lens. These are examples. Not all of them might even apply or might even be true, but these are examples of what type of education or awareness or messaging might be needed to help people understand the concept of actor-observer bias and potentially undo that bias. Now, just literally last week, a very interesting story came up. Some of you might have seen it on LinkedIn or somewhere else in Arizona. This man who is in the construction business lost his job, and he literally stood by the side of the major highways in 110-degree heat and was holding this sign. And a woman who runs a PR agency locally, she saw it. She was very intrigued by it. She literally put it up on her social media. And this guy got hundreds of job offers. So it's still a guy standing by the side of the road with a sign in his hand, but suddenly this sign and this guy are not subject to actor-observer bias, which is very interesting. Now, he's not homeless. At least we don't know if he is or not. The stories didn't talk about that. But this story got coverage in CNN and all the major news media, et cetera. Very interesting, very recent example of how our own actor-observer biases can kick in sometimes and not at other times. Now let's get closer to home and look at medicine. Think about all the disease states where you may have done work in the past, you may be currently working in any of these disease states, where the physician incorrectly judges the patient and perhaps even goes to the extreme of silently blaming the patient for their own situation, maybe not their condition itself, but their situation, the patient has brought it on upon themselves. Almost every metabolic condition would qualify for this. Many psychiatric conditions, respiratory conditions, you name it. You can probably just even use to figure out if this is a heuristic that is potentially influencing how physicians approach treatment. Which patients in their practice do they want to treat and want to invest time in? Which patients do they judge as it's kind of sort of a waste of time? They're never going to do what they should be doing, and not really understanding and appreciating their circumstances and jumping to conclusions about who they are as a person. So you can even in oncology, believe it or not, certain cancers like lung cancer, actor-observer bias is a heuristic that can play an important role. It's a dominant heuristic that can drive decision-making. Let's take a specific disease state. In pain, in chronic pain, 3 different ways actor-observer bias potentially comes into a patient's into the pain category. The first one, between 2 chronic pain patients. If you have pain and I have pain, unlike many other disease states, especially chronic conditions, where you and I would be able to understand each other's point of view and we'll be able to relate to each other, bond, and connect, etc. Not so much in pain. Pain is as a disease or as a condition is actually operates very differently. My pain is special and reflects hardships in my life. I don't see it the same for you. Your pain, it just kind of seems pain to me, and you're always complaining or whatever. And I somehow or the other, I am not able to put myself in your shoes, and vice versa as well. Very interesting dynamic. If your chronic pain could be so severe or debilitating that you have to occasionally get the help of a caregiver, whether it could be a spouse or anybody in the family, very interesting dynamic happens. Earlier on in your pain journey, you get your caregiver can actually understand your circumstances and empathize with you and put themselves in your shoes. But as your pain gets worse, which is when you need them the most, the exact opposite starts happening. The more you get worse, the less empathetic they are, and now they start judging you, and they start basically almost coming to the point of resentment, or just saying, oh, he's always complaining about his pain, and so on and so forth. So very interesting dynamic between the patient and their surrounding caregivers. And then between the patient and the physician, and this is actually documented even in medical literature, how physicians often are not able to appreciate patients' pain, especially certain races, like for African Americans, pain is undertreated. People don't quite accept, they don't believe that the patient is really in as much pain as they say they are. So it's, and might even be undertreating pain. So it's very interesting dynamics on how the same one heuristic in the same disease state or same condition manifesting itself in many different ways, leading to many different, having many different impacts on how treatment happens. Let's play you a commercial. This commercial has actor-observer bias in it, and this is from the cough category for Robitussin.
If you could see your cough, you'd see all the sickness you're spreading. Robitussin CF Max. Nothing lasts longer and treats more symptoms for your cough, cold, and flu. Robitussin CF Max Severe, because it's never just a cough.
So when you have a cough versus when you have a cold, very interestingly, people sympathize with you more when you have a cold. They tend to blame you more when you have a cough. In that commercial, you saw the guy when he was coughing, even though you were aware of your cough, if you look at like all the other people in the elevator, they couldn't wait to get out of there, right? So it's actor-observer bias. All of them have had cough also at some point in time, but right now, right here, get me away from this guy because I don't want to be anywhere close to him. And not being able to appreciate his or her circumstances, almost blaming him for coughing, and not understanding, appreciating that it's really not in his control. It's not like he wants to cough. He doesn't. He would rather not do it, but he's just physiologically not able to control it. So very interesting dynamic in how in very subtle ways, that commercial is actually based on actor-observer bias. So that was actor-observer bias. It's a bias that has far-reaching implications on how we are able to look at the world through other people's lenses and how we judge ourselves versus how we judge anybody else. That affects physicians and patients and many other many medical conditions. And we'll talk a little bit about how to use it in your disease state at the end. So let's go to the second heuristic first. This heuristic is disappointment aversion. If you are into behavioral science, you would know that there are a number of heuristics that are an aversion of some kind, loss aversion, ambiguity aversion, etc. So disappointment aversion is also an aversion, and let's look at what is that aversion to. So disappointment aversion is, the idea is that if you think that you might be disappointed, by the results of something you're considering doing. You're thinking about doing something, and you expect, already thinking ahead, that you're not going to be able to win. You're not going to be able to get to whatever your goal is. You're not going to achieve the end result, and you're expecting to be disappointed. Now you may back all the way up to, then what's the point of even doing it, right? Like, why bother? Or why should I waste my time or money or effort to even do it? This, one could argue, is irrational thinking, and it's a mental shortcut that you might be making a mistake by using this mental shortcut. Why or how? Well, let's say you did it, you whatever you were thinking about doing, you did it, and the result is lower than what you want or what you expected. But it may be better than what you have today. So very objectively, you're better off than you are right now, even though in your mind you have failed and you are disappointed. So now one could argue, well, okay, you were right. I may be better off than I am today, but if the improvement is so little, is it really worth spending the time or money or effort to do it? That may be a fair point. But in most cases, if the improvement is meaningful and the amount of effort is not significant, then why wouldn't you do it? Then are you wrong in not doing it because you have this kind of artificial expectation that you have created in your own mind, which is like just fallacious reasoning, if you will, that if you didn't have it, or if you were to overcome it, you would be better off than you are today. So this is called disappointment aversion. It's all about how you set expectations that may or may not be realistic, and how, because of the fear of being disappointed against those expectations, you might make bad decisions. So let's look at some examples of how this heuristic affects our decision-making in life, and again, we'll look at some non-pharma examples, and then we'll look at pharma. In the weight loss category, people who are interested in losing weight, and they are meant, when we say interested in losing weight, using some kind of a weight loss program. A lot of people are just interested in being healthy and do whatever they think is necessary on a daily basis to just stay healthy. But if you are interested, motivated enough to lose weight, and you are thinking about or considering a weight loss program, when you, and again, this is something we've researched quite a lot, when you talk to people about that, a lot of times you ask them, how much weight would you like to lose? It's like, I would like somewhere between 10 to 20 pounds, depending on what their weight is. If they're 30 pounds overweight, they'll probably say, I want to be 20 pounds, I lose 20 pounds. So that's kind of sort of the expectation they have set in their mind for that's worthwhile weight loss if I'm going to invest the time, money, etc., into a weight loss program. Based on their past experiences, having used Weight Watchers or Nutrisystem or whatever programs are available, if they were nowhere close to losing the 10, 20 pounds that they wanted to, they should either lower their expectation for, I've done this several times now. I have been overly optimistic or unrealistic about what I can expect. And I'm going to lower my expectations and therefore get more in line with what the reality is. But they don't do that. They actually irrationally continue to want to lose 20 pounds, even though they've never lost 20 pounds. Most of them have never lost, or they gained it right back, or they gained a significant amount of it back. So as a result of that kind of internal dialogue that they have with themselves, they may decide, why? I tried it 3 times already, whatever, this time, I'm not going to do it. Because what's the point? Well, if they had used the program, they might have lost 4 pounds, 5 pounds, or whatever that number is. which is better than not losing any weight at all, and much better than actually gaining 4 pounds during the same time period, which the probability of that happening is not insignificant. It's in many cases, it could be a meaningful probability that they might actually gain some pounds during that same period. So, and eventually will pay a much bigger price in terms of their health from having, continuing to gain weight from all the metabolic conditions that the risk factors increase. So this is one of the behavior, one of the things that can help explain this quote unquote irrational behavior is disappointment aversion heuristic in terms of what they expect versus what they think they can get, and then the fear of not being able to get there, leading to disappointment in their mind. Now let's look at some disease states or some conditions where disappointment aversion has played out itself or affects decision-making. Anybody who has been following or working in the Hep C category up until 2012 or 13, physicians would warehouse a lot of the patients, Hep C patients, because the therapies available up until that point were really didn't affect the virus itself. They were really all just therapies designed to potentially protect the liver to some extent, and they were not very effective, and they had nasty side effects also. And many Hep C patients are alcoholics or drug users, and problematic medical histories. So physicians would take all of these factors into account, and if they thought that they were going to be disappointed, that the patient's not going to stick to the therapy, it takes 24 or 48 weeks to even get whatever results, like interferon therapies were providing or achieving in those days. And if the patient was not reliable and, they were an addict, etc., the physician would use many of these criteria to make a gut call whether they wanted to even treat the patient at all. And they would not even present the patient with treatment options and kind of just nudge the patient away. It's chronic, but it's not, it's not like acute, so it's not going to kill you. And, it's just in your system, we'll keep an eye on it, et cetera, type of approach or logic. Today, with the introduction of the direct-acting antivirals, which you may be familiar, like Harvoni and Sovaldi and Mavorite, et cetera. Today, in the Hep C category, disappointment aversion is not even a heuristic that drives decision-making. So sometimes disease states and medical conditions can evolve so much. Sometimes they evolve because the treatment paradigm completely changed. New therapies came into the market. Other times the guidelines change or recalls happen. Lots of things, lots of drivers can shape the marketplace, so much so that the heuristic just literally so there are times when a new heuristic comes into play, which never existed, or times when a heuristic that was very dominant in how treatments were made is not even playing a role anymore. And Hep C is a good category, a good example of that. Here's another example that you might have. There's new medications in the market for endometriosis. And this is a campaign. This is a unbranded DSE type of campaign to kind of generate awareness of unmet need in endometriosis. And let's take a look at this commercial.
Seems to be the problem.
Just some cramps.
Hold on. Say it's like stabbing knives. Sometimes I have to call in sick.
Any pelvic pain?
Kinda. Say it's like something's hammering at my uterus, even when it's not my period.
Pain with sex?
Speak up.
Actually, it's all terrible.
If you have painful periods, pelvic pain in between periods, or pain with sex, ask your gynecologist if it could be endometriosis. 1 in 10 women have it, yet many don't know it. Learn more at speakendo.com.
So this is any disease state where you are facing a dynamic where the patient is kind of just hesitant to bring up details about their condition to the physician because they think that the physician is not going to understand or appreciate or relate, or and therefore what's the point? I'm just going to be disappointed, right? Like why? And just, you know, the physician is going to just kind of, you know, like do whatever they're going to do anyways. Anytime you have a dynamic like that, disappointment aversion can be playing a big role. So this is an example of, like, in this medical condition, since there really aren't very many treatment options, or certainly good ones recently, that this is a disease state like this can have the presence of disappointment aversion.
That seems to be the.
So just wrapping up, how do you use this? Actor observer bias. If you're working in a disease state where you think you might have the presence of actor observer bias, look for evidence of physicians, caregivers, or anybody around blaming the patient. That's most of the time what's going to happen. And if that's happening, you are almost going to find a segmentation in the market on how little or how much of the bias is there. You're going to find a continuum, and some physicians will be highly biased and they'll be very clinically oriented, blaming the patient, all the way to patient-centric physicians. This is a very difficult heuristic to overcome or to fight through messaging, and you always have to proceed with caution. If you really call out the physician or the patient, whoever has the bias, in that they're not thinking about the other, they're not able to put themselves in other person's shoes, they will very quickly become defensive and shut down and not want to pay attention to your messaging. So that is something that you should, if you're using this heuristic, just be aware of that. And for disappointment aversion, if through your market research in your disease state, look for unrealistic expectations that are unsupported or unsubstantiated by medical literature that physicians or patients may have. And anytime you see that, you will probably find disappointment aversion is going to come into play. You might have to either overcome or correct past expectations that have been kind of legacy, from 30, 40 years of treating this disease, or you might have to correct, or you might have to set new expectations for the future that are much more realistic and adequate, so that that you don't face the disappointment aversion. For launch drugs, disappointment aversion may be something that you have to address very early on as part of scientific communications work or mechanism of disease type of messaging. And not that you don't have to do it later, but it may start much earlier, is our point. So these are just some ideas on how to utilize or apply these two heuristics that we introduced in today's masterclass. So good luck with that. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. As you registered, there was an email provided for you to ask questions. Thank you for joining this masterclass. This was masterclass number 12.